Professor of Economics Dr Roman Grynberg and I recently had a general chat about the Namibian fishing industry and how we found ourselves entangled in the country's biggest corruption scandal, #fishRot.
You go back to the 1980s, there was a thing called the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which allowed countries to declare a 200 nautical mile limit. But because we were under occupation by the apartheid regime, no government would ever recognize the apartheid regime's attempt to declare an exclusive economic zone over Namibian waters. It would never happen. So up till 1990, beyond the 12-mile limit, right, there's this 200-mile limit. It was a free-for-all. The Spanish pillaged us, all right? They absolutely... Spain has a lot to answer for what was done. I remember in 1990, 5 sea captains were caught fishing illegally, Spanish, in our waters. But it's not the illegality, was just a complete and utter free-for-all. And we had what would have been potentially 1.5 million tons of fish resource per annum. But we've destroyed it. The simple fact is that pilchards, which could have brought us 30 years ago if it were managed properly, 400,000 tons. That's what the World Bank said. We should be able to take 400,000 tons of pilchards out of the water. We don't take 30,000 tons out now. The problem is that it was fiercely exploited by the apartheid regime, and it did get a lot better immediately after independence. It did. Things improved. There was at least as much transparency in the first decade as there was under the apartheid regime. We had quotas, we had limits. Listen, should I put this politely? Despite what the marine biologists tell us, we know nothing about the sex life of fish. All right. So what the biomass is of the fish, how many fish there are out there, varies enormously from year to year. So you can declare an allowable catch, and it may look like it's sustainable, but it actually destroys the stock. The problem is, if you look at most of the fish species, they're in decline. The allowable catch is in decline. The actual catch is in decline. You look at over a 20 or 30 year period. Some of them are improving, all right? But we could have had massive industries if we'd been more conservative at the very beginning, and many more jobs would have been created, because there's not much you can do, for example, with something like pilchard sardines. You stick them in a can and it creates all sorts of jobs, right? Not great jobs, but they're jobs nonetheless. Here, I'm sorry, I totally blame the Namibian people for this. For years, that newspaper, the Namibian, has been publishing story after story about the malfeasance in that industry, and nobody cares. And if you don't care, well, then you deserve what you get, all right? I'm so sorry. I know it's cruel and it's not nice, but there was ever hardly a noise made. But what was the little fish rod? We found out in 2015 when President Gebhardt forced members of parliament to declare their interests, that 24 out of 104 members of parliament had fisheries interests. Another 26 had agricultural interests, and major agricultural interests as well. And nobody really said a word. It was like every other newspaper article. Nobody asked the question, what is going on that Parliament behaves in this manner? Let's say you get a quota of 1,000 or 10,000 tons of horse mackerel. And they give out dozens and dozens of these quotas, not of that size. But you can sell each ton to an actual fishing company. There's not that many of them. There's only 20 or 30, but there's hundreds of quotas given out. So people on-sell them for $3,000 a ton. That was the price. When I looked at it, just a few months ago, it varies for horse mackerel, but it was up to $3,000 a ton. You could become an instant millionaire if you were connected enough to get a quota.
Still on the fishy, government thought it would cash in big time by auctioning fishing quotas, gamma to help in the fight against COVID. I spoke to Professor of Economics Dr Roman Grynberg about the ways in which Namibians could have benefited from the country's natural resources. Was there political will to develop the country and its citizens? Dr Grynberg criticized Finance Minister Shiimi and suggested that he should have resigned following that blunder.
I wrote an article after Minister Shiimi got up and said that he had made $640 million from the sale of quotas. I wrote an article in the Namibian basin that I really want to apologize. I got it completely wrong because Shiimi told us an untruth. He actually only got $8 million. How is it? Because you see, when you conduct an auction in a specific sector, you don't just let anybody bid. You say you must be a fishing company, you must have capacity, you must have the following things, you must have money in the bank, and you must show us. And if you don't pay up, you have to give us 10% or 20%. But nobody, they bid 640 million, but paid only 8. I'm sorry, in other countries, in other countries he'd be forced to resign. To get up and say something like that is shameful, all right? And then turn around literally a week later and say, oh, and why? You have a look at the list of companies that were actually bidding. There were foreign exchange companies, Angolan foreign exchange companies were bidding for fish. But that's not the way in which you professionally conduct an auction. All right? You conduct an auction only with a limited number of participants who are able to deal with it. I don't know how Shiimi shows his face in Parliament after something like that.
Dr Grynberg believes that our systems are lacking, and particularly our taxation systems, which see international corporations doing business in Africa getting away with murder.
There's so much we could do if we had a competent taxation authority. We get treated on just about everything that we trade. I did some work on copper, on our copper exports. And this was 3 years ago, and according to the Namibian, the NSA, all of our copper went to Switzerland. But then I went to the Swiss and I said, well, how much do you import from Namibia? The answer is nothing, not $1 worth of copper. So where was the copper going? The copper wasn't going to Switzerland. The papers were going through Switzerland because Switzerland is a tax haven, all right? And then the copper was going, I understand, ultimately to China. But we don't even know where our exports are going, let alone their value, let alone what taxes we should be earning. Look, there was a time, and I tell you, immediately after independence, when Namibia was considered as the shining light of Africa in terms of fisheries management. All right? We were considered to be really, really good. Things went to hell in the last 10 to 15 years, and we're no longer we no longer can be viewed as having a proper fisheries management. What should be done? Let me tell you. I wrote an article called "There's No Time for Introspection," as the president has said. No, we need to bring in the FAO and say, gentlemen, we need a public inquiry into what happened. All right, not the Minister of Fisheries declaring an auction that is a complete cock-up, you know, which is a shameful cock-up. No, we need to know what's wrong, and we need professionals to look at it and say what needs to be done. We're not doing that. My suspicion is there's more there than meets the eye, but that's just a suspicion.